Hi everyone, and welcome to our cash flow tactics webinar. My name's Greg Roughan. I'm from Unleashed. We're an inventory software company, and I'm joined by Keth McLelland, who's a fractional CFO and finance director at Sapling Spirits, as well as Henrik Grim, the CEO and co-founder of MIMO, an app built specifically around the cash flow challenges small business people face. So we'll be hopefully getting some very practical, useful advice on cash flow best practices from our panelists. And then towards the end, I'm going to run a little slideshow on cash flow and inventory, basically because I find that topic easier to explain visually rather than verbally. Finally, before I hand over to our guests, we are recording this, so if you need to drop off, feel free, and we'll email you the video link afterwards. But do stick around if you can, because I'm keen to open the floor for Q&A towards the end. So if you have questions, please drop them in throughout the session, and we'll pick them up at the end. For now, though, I'll pass over to Henrik for perhaps an explanation of your business and maybe the kind of way that you like to think about cash flow to kick us off.
Sure, thanks so much. Just very, very briefly, I'm Henrik. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called MIMO. We help businesses, in particular in inventory-heavy businesses, like in FMB or in fashion and so on, put payments and financing on autopilot. So down to the left, you see a few of the companies that we work with, anything from sort of food and beverage brands like Surreal or Nice, to Stubble & Co. and Hunter & Gather. And so a few brands that are using us both to save time on processing payments, both getting paid and making payments to suppliers, and accessing working capital when doing that. So there's sort of 4 modules that we have on our platform. MIMO Pay, that helps you essentially batch pay suppliers or employees in any currency without doing any data entry. MIMO Get Paid, to help you automate chasing and credit control to get paid faster by your customers. MIMO Flex, which is our built-in working capital facility, up to $1 million to essentially pay suppliers later. And then MIMO Fetch, that helps you automate bookkeeping and eliminate data entry by essentially capturing any invoices or supplier invoices that you need to pay, and then automatically coding them into your accounting platform. So that's a little bit about myself and MIMO, trying to keep it very short so we can get on with the discussion.
Cool. Thank you. And I guess we were talking earlier about the way you like to think about the cash conversion cycle, the sort of the stages of it. Do you mind just laying that out for us here?
Sure. I think, look, cash flow in itself is a relatively complex and sort of convoluted word, and sort of relatively overused, I would argue, almost in the sort of financial ecosystem. And so what I quite like to do is make it a little more concrete by talking about the cash conversion cycle, which is really the number of days that it takes for your cash to convert from you paying suppliers until you put it in your inventory, sell it on to customers, and then get the cash back. And so the time in terms of days that takes is essentially your cash conversion cycle. Now, those are 3 separate steps that I mentioned that you can sort of look at and start optimizing and think about how you optimize as a business, both sort of tactically day-to-day across each step, but also then obviously within them, there's lots of strategies. Obviously, we'll get to sort of inventory and how you work with your inventory turn to streamline your business. But there's lots of things you can also do, both on the sort of days payable outstanding, which is essentially anything that has to do with you paying suppliers and before you get the goods into your inventory. And then the final step being your days sales outstanding, i.e. you getting paid by your customers, which include things like credit control processes, but also customer payment terms. So those discrete steps, the days payable outstanding, i.e. how long time it takes for you sort of to pay, to let cash leave the door before you get your goods, to inventory turn, to day sales outstanding, are 3 discrete topics that I think we can sort of anchor in when we run through this today.
Nice. Okay. And Keth, do you mind just sort of telling us a little bit about yourself? You've obviously got a lot of experience in the space across quite a few FMCG businesses, apart from Sapling, where you are now at.
Yeah. Hi, nice to meet everyone. So yeah, my name is Keth. I'm currently fractional CFO, FD at Sapling Spirits, so a drinks, vodka and gin brand. I have previously worked at food and other drinks businesses as well. So got sort of lots of experience in stock management and all these good things that Henrik was talking about, and using Unleashed and using MIMO and various other products and Zero and all sorts of things. So, and also duty as well, which is quite I don't know if there's any other drinks brands on this call, but alcohol as well, that's quite a taxing, literally thing. That is also difficult to manage from a cash flow perspective. So just sort of following on from what Henrik was saying, keeping your cash conversion cycle as small and as short as possible is the ultimate aim. But there are various steps within that to really maximize and help improve that cycle and keep it as short as possible.
And you think, before we dive into some of those actual tactics and those sort of three sections, do the tactics vary depending on your business stage? Because, looking at some of the people on the call today, there's some reasonably established businesses, there's some people who look like startups. Are you paying different kinds of attention at different times?
I think so. Yes, definitely. I think it really depends on your funding cycle and how much cash you've got in the bank. I mean, you always want to try and keep it as small as possible, because you're having a small working capital cycle or cash conversion cycle, like Henrik was talking about. It's the same thing, really. Is going to save you money in the long term, whatever you do. But there's obviously a balance to be had there between knowing in FMCG world, when you're buying stock from suppliers, generally, if you buy in bulk, if you buy in bigger volumes, you're going to be paying less money. So you've got to have a trade-off between buying in bigger volumes, but also considering that if you're not going to be able to, if you have to pay your supplier over a short period of time, i.e. you only have to pay it straight in advance, or if you have to pay for it only in 30 days time, if you're going to be sitting on that amount of stock for a long period of time before you sell it, then that's all tying up your working capital, your cash conversion cycle, and making it longer. So it really depends on the stage of your business, more in terms of how much cash you have in, as to how much you've got to manage that cash conversion cycle. So you can have much more bigger businesses that are very established, but if they're coming to the end of a funding window, then those kind of decisions are much more key for cash flow, that you might consider really focusing on your cash conversion cycle compared to having better margins.
And with the tactics you'd be looking at there, be like, as in buying smaller amounts of stock, moving them faster, having a sort of faster flow through.
Exactly, yeah. So taking each element of what Henrik was saying, looking at each part of it. So when you're buying your stock, if you were trying to shorten your cash conversion cycle, you'd probably buy in smaller amounts. You produce more often and more regularly, rather than doing it in sort of 3 or 4 month blocks or something, and doing it in chunkier. You might, in theory, get a smaller cost per unit, but you're obviously taking up a lot of cash in one go. So if you're getting towards the end of a funding window, if cash is very tight, then you might want to really try and look at producing as regularly as you can to meet orders. What's called a just-in-time inventory system is what all the guys, that's what you really want to be able to aim for, but that's obviously quite challenging. Tactically as well, looking at negotiating with your suppliers to be able to pay on longer terms, so getting credit from your suppliers, essentially pushing the weight onto them rather than you. So holding stock for as little amount of time and pushing out those supplier terms as much as you can.
So basically, sorry, can you explain that a little more? Pushing out the supplier terms?
So if you are bringing your stock in, and a lot of the time when you're a very young business, because you're unknown in the market, you will have to pay for that stock up front. Right. But over time, you might be able to get a credit term from your supplier, i.e. we'll take the stock and we'll pay you in 30 days time, or we'll take the stock and we'll pay you in 60 days time. We'll take the stock, we'll pay you in 90 days time. The longer you can push that out, the better, because what's then going to happen is you're going to hold on to that stock for a period of time. You're then going to sell it, and hopefully you get the sale immediately, as in you get the cash in, but you're not paying for it until 30 days or 60 days later. So then you're shrinking your cash conversion cycle to as small as it can be. What I tend to see most regularly is you will get the stock in, you'll pay for it 30 to 60 days later. You'll probably hold that stock for 30 days, 60 days. You'll then sell it, and you probably give credit terms to your customers. Say you're selling to Waitrose or wholesalers that will only pay you in 60 days. So then you'll end up with a cash conversion cycle. I'm going to get the maths wrong now, but something like you're basically out of the money for about 45 days.
Right.
Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And presumably the relative size of the business determines the kind of terms that they set. I mean, are you always treated fairly by the big retailers? Are they
No.
going to be hanging on to their money as long as they can and they've got all the
Yeah,
value?
yeah, they're the retailer. So I think the smaller you are and the less history you have, the less credit you are going to be able to get. So, for example, if you're buying your stock, they might initially, the first few orders, make you pay upfront,
Hmm.
but then you should really be on it. And this is part of your plan as a business to not accept those terms for very long. You've got to build those relationships with your suppliers, be the nicest possible person, pay on time when you can, because when things get tricky, which no doubt they will, you want to be their best friend so that you can say, hey, can we please move this to 30 days or 60 days? And then you keep to those as much as you can so that if it
Mm.
really gets tricky, then you can really say, hi, I'm having a bit of a situation. Can we please push it to a couple of months or 3 months or whatever?
Yeah.
So that's your suppliers. In terms of your customers, again, what I would really recommend is treating them the same way you're treated, in the sense that if it's a small outfit and you're not 100% confident that they've got good cash, then you ask for upfront payment.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's a difficult situation to balance because you obviously want the sale, but you've got to make sure that you're not a charity case and you're getting that cash in.
Yeah.
But because you've got to balance that with some of the wholesalers and bigger groceries out there like Tesco's and stuff that won't pay you for 90, 120 days.
Mm. Is that someone like you? Are you going to be negotiating those terms, or do you need to set the sort of standard procedures in the business and make sure that the sales teams are well briefed? I mean, or equally the purchasing manager, or is that a CEO level kind of conversation when you're a startup?
I think it probably depends on the size of the business. I would say all of it needs to be very much a business-wide thing. So it's kind of setting the tone from the top that there are standard operating procedures that even in the smallest business of 2 to 3 people can really be set in stone. So
Yeah.
if the sales team are going out, there are very strict black and white rules that the FD or CEO is sort of laid down to say, if we're going out to a new, I don't know, independent retailer, a nice like deli shop down the road or something, and we've never sold to them before. These are exactly what you need to do. We won't be offering credit terms to these people. Or if there needs to be a conversation that is then had between the salesperson and the financial person to make the decision of whether we are going to offer credit terms. So I think you can set up very good standing operating procedures, and making sure finance are involved and the whole team are involved together in that process.
Yeah.
And for example, negotiating with suppliers, ensuring that a finance person or someone who's comfortable to push those suppliers to make sure you can get the most out of them, because it's kind of, if you don't ask, you don't get. And I think most suppliers, if they're any established business, they're thinking of their own skin, and but they're also expecting you to ask. I think a lot of
Yeah.
small businesses get nervous that they think, oh, we're too small, we can't ask for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Kith is onto something interesting here, which we're seeing across like our customer base a lot. And you were sort of asking a little bit about up front, which is, does this sort of change? Does this problem change over time, right? Or is it the same sort of throughout? Are you looking at different things in the early days versus later? I think what Kith is on to here is essentially this idea that there is really the tactics that you would use for optimizing and controlling your cash conversion cycle are largely the same throughout your sort of lifetime as a company. However, obviously, the scale of which the problem sort of is well, the scale of the problem really, or the challenge, obviously grows with you as a business. And I think the tactics that are available to you are definitely developing over time. So as you grow and scale, you will have more leverage in discussing with customers and with suppliers in terms of payment terms, for example, and how that impacts your business. But there's obviously the tactics to take control of your cash conversion cycle are really largely the same, but the leverage that you have to control them definitely vary. I think the first thing that's really coming across across our sort of customer base, and when I'm speaking to founders about this, is the first step is really to get full awareness of what this is and how it impacts your business, right? I think especially in the very early days, many come into sort of wanting to build a brand and wanting to sell a product and sort of having that fire in their belly around that topic, and then sort of getting those first painful experiences around working capital management, and then you get your first large orders, and you sort of learn by doing. And a lot of it has to do in the early days about securing funding, right? And to make sure that you have working capital to cover for those first few orders. But then if you can in the early days, make sure, like Keth says, ensuring that the full team is aware on the importance of customer payment terms and credit control with your largest customers and how that impacts your ability to actually scale. If you set that up early, it will allow you to scale a lot more efficiently over time, and sort of getting into the habit of, running that day-to-day in your business early really does help you. And I think one of the sort of best cash conversion cycles we've seen in our company was literally that the founder had, in the very early days, they were still sort of 5-7 people, educated the full team across both sales and operations on the supplier management side around the importance of thinking about cash flow, because she had previous painful experiences from before, and getting into that habit early really sort of drilled into the team this efficiency that then helped them to continue scale. Now that goes obviously across all 3 components, right? When it comes to supplier payment terms, inventory turn and efficiency, and customer payment terms. And so I think Keth is spot on in that a lot of it has to do with ensuring that there's these procedures that you can get into early that then help you scale over time.
It's been a long time since I sat next to the finance manager at another company, and sat there and marveled at the time that he would put into just calling people up and politely chasing for payments. I mean, have things moved on since then? Is that I mean, I think everybody has to do it, but surely there's an app for that, or is that, or you talk about visibility. Is that something that is? Are there parts of that should be automated, for example?
Well, there's definitely an app for that.
Yeah.
We do have a module for that. I think there's 2 parts to that problem. I think the first one is obviously realizing whether you've been paid or not, right? And actually keeping track. Like, we've got so many founders that are still logging into the house bank to sort of check on the bank account whether they've actually received the payment or not. But that process in itself can take time. And then the second problem is, then obviously if you're realizing that you've not been paid, what do you do about it? And send those chasers. And like, obviously in our product, we got some functionality around exactly those 2 problems. But I know, Keth, what's your experience in Sapling or other brands that you're working with?
I think, well, for my experience in sort of stock-based brands, maybe it's because of relationships with the sales team, although I don't suppose that differs by industry. The reminders help to an extent, but you have to be on it. You have to be really on it. And you get to know, I think you get to know who some bad payers are, but also you get to be known as the person that doesn't accept bad payment. And I think that's quite crucial. I mean, yeah, I think it's essential to really have, like, we have a sort of bi-weekly credit control meeting, ops, finance, sales, all together. Everyone's aware of who's due, who's going to be put on stop. Unleashed is used to do that. Credit terms are used to make sure the credit limits are put in place and make sure that orders don't go out, because that's basically the best leverage you have. And that I think that's what's quite key for an FMCG business, and why the phone call is so important. Is essentially, if you put that order on stop and you say those customers aren't allowed any more stock until they've paid their due debts, the orders team get in contact with the sales team go, hi buyer, and buyer goes, hi accounts team, and accounts team goes and pays the invoice.
Yeah.
So it requires that kind of friendly relationship and being on top of it, to make it happen. And I think the kind of reminder emails work well with people who are good payers, but they don't work well for those that aren't. And you get known quite quickly as being the person that will just be the badgering caller that goes, pay me, pay me, pay me.
Yeah, right. In terms of that bi-weekly credit control meeting, that's pretty interesting in itself. Where does that intel live? Are you personally owning that process, and do you have a separate system? Are you working in your accounting software? Are you working in spreadsheets?
So
what
I
is
mean,
the
I think there are various tech available, but they're costly. So
Mm,
at the moment, our finance, so we have where I'm working at the moment, and lots of small businesses will have an outsourced bookkeeper,
mhm.
and they are managing that. And there's a spreadsheet, and it's got all of the communication logs on it. So basically, all the commentary of like emailed on this date, called on this date, action plan, and a stop column. And essentially is sort of it's quite a manual process, but we haven't really found anything better
Yeah,
to really log the information.
yeah. And then you're saying the operational side of it lives in your inventory system. So you
Yeah,
actually
so at the
when you
moment we're using Unleash for stop. And so essentially the orders team then cannot process any orders at all because obviously their KPIs on getting it out as quickly as possible. So unless you put that hard stop in, I find that things slip through the net quite quickly.
yeah,
But if you put that hard stop in or credit limits in, it means that they can't actually physically process the order.
yeah, right.
Then the phone call has to be made to sort out the situation.
So it's actually baked into the system so that you're not
Yeah, so it's
actually
like you were saying, it's those S&OP standard operating procedures to make sure these things don't happen. Because before you know it, you can quite easily build up a debtor book where they just owe you lots of money.
yeah. In terms of the big growth trajectory, because later on I'm going to do my little presentation. I hate PowerPoint, but I think it's the easiest way for me to explain some of the inventory stuff because I find it quite abstract sometimes. But in terms of that sort of forecasting for a big future deal, or say you land a big deal, or um, I don't know, you've got a big order coming up and it's outside your current financing. I mean, where are people going for financing?
I don't know if Henrik, you want to answer that, or I can do one.
Yeah, well, there's obviously lots of different options when it comes to financing. I think clearly in the early days, lots of brands start working with equity, right, and use that as the major base of funding, going to friends, family, angel investors to get that first sort of kicker. It's obviously harder to find credit options, for example, in the very early days when your sort of track record on revenue generation is a little bit limited. So that's usually where people start. And then sort of as you grow, your options really start to sort of pop up to a greater extent. And so you obviously in this space have anything from sort of factoring provider, and that would essentially help you accelerate incoming revenues from your customers. You would, in many cases, have more specialized more inventory financing options. In particular, there are sort of certain ones that are focused on drinks, for example, and alcohol drinks for that sort of something like Sapling could consider. And then you have a plethora of other sort of more unsecured credit products that would essentially work a little more across different use cases. And I think what, as a founder and as a business owner, you're sort of part of the game to figure this map out. Obviously, we help many of the brands that we work with to map these options out and sort of compare them. I think there's really sort of two things that you need to think about. I would argue the first one is trying to make sure that you align the sort of timing of your the timing and the length of the investment that you're making with also the length of the term of your financing. So if you're looking to if you have a cash conversion cycle, again, of those sort of 45 days, 60 days that Keth mentioned, that it does make sense to try to align your funding term, the length of, for example, a credit product that you're using with that cash conversion cycle. So you're really aligning it to the use case. And then I think the second point is obviously you need to make sure that you understand the cost as well as the terms of that financing. And that is a bit of a complex area where obviously you should go to your trusted partners, either investors or peers or players like us. Obviously, we help out to look at your different options. We do offer one type of financing product, but that's sort of not necessarily suited for all use cases. So we do help sort of find options as well. So I think for the specific use case of you sort of quickly scaling revenues, we've definitely supported brands in those cases with essentially us going in and taking a bit of a deeper look at sort of those purchase orders and what's sort of coming through, and then helping them to finance, in particular, that purchasing then of stock using our credit product. But there's a plethora of options, and I think you just got to be mindful of, in particular, making sure that you understand the terms and sort of any sort of risk that you're taking on assigning security or so on to lenders, for example, but in particular also the cost of the effective interest rates of loans, which is sometimes a little bit harder to sort of compare than you might think, especially for things like installment-based loans, where actually the cost is relatively hard to analyze. So we're happy to help on that, obviously, if you get into those discussions.
Keth, do you have preferences in this sort of area over your different roles?
I think well, access, like Henrik said, access to debt in particular or any lines of credit kind of will change over the period of your lifetime, and a lot of it is a period of sort of the business cycle, and a lot of it will depend on how much profit you're making as to the access you get, because obviously the risk appetite of the lender is really down to can they get paid back. And I think my general feeling is learn about it, like learn your options, because by the time you need them, it's almost too late, or could be too late. So learn like what you just have conversations with people. Don't feel nervous about, oh, I don't know what this is. They're talking about base rates and interest rates and all this kind of like jargon. Essentially, they're trying to sell you a product at the end of the day. So if you make relationships with people, call up these places, go on the British Bank website, which is quite helpful to understand your different options. Do a bit of Googling. There's places like, have conversations with MIMO, have conversations with Funding Circle, have conversations with different factoring providers. And it doesn't mean you have to take any of that out, but you start to understand more about it. And then when you do need to, you can start forecasting that way, because you want to, if you are going to want to take on a line of credit, you want to see the impact of that. And so that you can make the decisions in a more sort of timely fashion, because what you don't want to do is kind of get down to it and go, oh, we need something, and then you've got to really upskill yourself quite quickly.
Yeah, I think Ken is spot on there in terms of sort of applying and making sure you know and understand your options sort of early rather than at last sort of resort, right? It sort of all, in particular, obviously in credit, but also equity investors will obviously struggle to sort of come in at a stage where it's sort of almost gone too far. And so make sure you do that work early and seek advice from people that you trust and that are knowledgeable. We got lots of resources if people are curious, where you can read up on different options and sort of how you should think about them. So obviously happy to share if helpful.
Nice. Well, I feel like I'm probably due to talk about inventory cash flow, which is an appalling topic, which is why I've put together some slides. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take a liberty and share my screen. Let's have a little go here. Okay. And pretty sure. How's that? Oh, is that coming up?
Yep.
Love it. Okay, so let's dive in. I want to just drill into the inventory issue from the cash flow perspective and unpack just kind of how much you can release by applying what to us is some fairly straightforward inventory management best practice. I don't think any of this will be new to both of you on this call, but hopefully it's useful. So we're going to have a look at releasing cash flow here. I want to look at a little bit of cash flow that you can save here. And probably the most exciting place, the possibility of saving quite a lot of cash flow here. And what do we mean by that? Well, naturally, these little charts are put together represent the stock you hold in your business. And, you can think of each of these green blocks as 1 day's worth of inventory. As you can see, they get topped up at the start of your replenishment cycle. Then each day you use up materials and manufacturing, or you sell goods. Your stock levels drop until you replenish again, your goods arrive, and you're back at the left-hand side of the chart, and the cycle repeats. Obviously, this is a very idealized view. The real world's, really much messier. And you have different cycles across different products, locations, and suppliers. So this is a sort of idealized, aggregated perspective in these charts. But we can help the picture get more realistic by putting some numbers to it. For example, I can tell you that this year, the average small to micro manufacturer in the UK had £214,000 worth of stock in their warehouses at any given time during Q2. And by small to micro, I mean firms of around about 2 million quid turnover and under. And that's based on anonymized data from Unleashed users. So 214K was the average in 2Q across the cycle, which kind of gives us the context for this challenge we have of optimizing inventory cash flow. It's not colossal sums of money, but it's certainly not nothing. And it doesn't take a leap of imagination to see how the budget for a growth marketing campaign, for example, or a new salesperson's monthly wages could be sliced out of that total if we're clever about it. To do that, though, we want to zoom in a bit closer and find out the value of each of these green blocks. And so if each block is the stock you need to cover one day's operations across all your products, I can tell you that each of these units is worth £2,473 on average. Again, that's direct data from Unleashed. So basically, we're looking at about 2.5K. Excuse me. Obviously, these figures vary across different sub-industries. I actually saw, with the food and beverage businesses that are on this call, I had a look, and it's interesting to see that small food manufacturers have quite a bit more cash tied up in stock. It's over £300,000 on average, with the days where the stock cover more like 4K. The beverage businesses, Keth, were much closer to these averages. I'm not sure if it's gelling with your experience, but this is sort of the some of the small firms that we're working with where they're sitting. So, what does that mean? And we're talking about that sort of inventory turnover cycle. Basically, it means that anytime we're able to reduce our replenishment spend by one day's worth of stock cover without getting into that dreaded stock out territory, we can release 2.5K. And if you happen to reorder 4 times a year and you shave a day's worth of stock cover out each time, that's 10 grand. If you reorder 10 times a year and manage to do the same, that's £25,000 you didn't need tied up in stock. Now, obviously, one way of doing that we spoke about earlier is ordering smaller quantities more frequently. It's a little bit like doing your supermarket shop weekly instead of monthly. You need much less cash each time, and you're also way less likely to end up with the fridge full of expired goods that you didn't really need, metaphorically speaking, or literally speaking if you're a food business. So in terms of these little charts, we're shortening its width, removing that tallest column on the left, so we don't need to buy that one extra block. In the real world, of course, your ability to shorten that cycle is limited by things like shipping costs and your supplier lead times, but not everything there is outside your control. So tactics you can apply include standard operating procedures, as we're talking about. Do you, for example, always receipt goods in as soon as they arrive, or do they sometimes get left overnight on the loading bay? It's a really good practice to have your people drop what they're doing the second that goods arrive and record them into your system. Because if the person who does your reordering thinks your lead times are longer than they really are, they miss the chance to reduce your spend. The same thing goes for your internal processes around signing off purchase orders for inventory. So do your finance people do it in batches once a week? Do they take a few more days than they need? Efficiency here has the potential for real savings. It may seem piecemeal, but remember, if you reduce your internal lead times and apply that as a standard process across all your inventory purchases, then each day of stock cover you don't need is that 2.5K saved. Replenish 4 times, it's 10K, 10 times is 25, and so on. SLAs, fairly self-explanatory. If you've the opportunity to agree lead times with your suppliers and you can reduce them, that is a win. And lastly, nearshoring. Choosing suppliers closer to you can save you money, even if the unit price you pay is higher. It's also much easier to run that just-in-time style responsive replenishment cycle when you're not having to think about filling expensive shipping containers with goods that you don't have an immediate need for. So all of those things are great, but they don't by themselves release any cash flow unless you lower your replenishment levels accordingly. And knowing exactly how much you can do that is the tricky part, right? Especially if you have lots of products. So in a moment, I'm going to show you some practical ways to work out what your optimal inventory investment should be at a SKU by SKU level. And I promise it won't involve hundreds of calculations using the formula on screen. But before we do that, let's look again at one of those charts I flashed up. Because a lot of the tactics we've been talking about have assumed we've got fairly steady demand for our products over time. This, however, is what a stock holding strategy might look like, where we have big changes in our demand coming in the future, so that our stock needs are going to increase in those later months on the right-hand side of the chart, but they'll be low at other times. So your seasonal products, for example, might look like this. It also happens with product launches, where you might have marketing campaigns driving sales and so on. So now obviously in this scenario, your cash flow is going to be massively affected if you have a static stock holding strategy. So we'll need a tailored approach rather than always maintaining stock on hand that meets our peak needs. So we'll look at how we can do that too. Firstly, let's take a look at how we might optimize our spend on products where we have fairly stable demand. And to help me do that, I'm going to just end this presentation. I'll take one more liberty and I'll share my other screen. This is Unleashed, and specifically a module on the system called AIM, which is Advanced Inventory Manager. It looks complicated at first glance, but it's basically just a list of my products, right? This is potentially familiar to you, Keth. You can see the names on the left-hand side, plus I have details about where they're stored, min and max levels, supplier lead days, and the value of what I hold. So let's just, let's pretend we're in that scenario we talked about. We've negotiated with supplier to lock in better lead times. That's a good outcome for me. I should be able to order less each time, but how do I work that out? These are all my products that come from one particular supplier, and there's something like 42 different SKUs in this list, which all get used at different rates. Some are even ingredients that get used in multiple products, which themselves sold at different speeds. So manually working out what I need per day, per product would be a nightmare. Thankfully, though, I've got this lovely little column here that tells me the rate of demand. That is the beauty of using software that runs your sales and manufacturing as well. The system already knows how much of each product to use. So all I need to do in this instance is adjust this number here, my lead days from that supplier, down to the agreed number. And these figures here, my min and max levels, will reset. And that means as soon as I run low on any product, I'll be prompted to reorder up to the max, and the purchase order will automatically populate with that new lower quantity that I need, which locks in that saving. So I'll just do that now, and it's very straightforward. So we've got a 90-day lead time from our suppliers. We literally just set it to the new number, and it's already just calculated all my new correct min and max levels for each of these products. And if I'm lucky and I scroll down, there we go. We've got a summary of the kind of the financial effect of that change. So I'm just going to go across now. Do you mind telling me, can you see a new screen there? Is that sharing a new tab? Cool. Okay. So last little piece, apologies for the extended demo, but I think it's just interesting to look at it, that scenario, which is much more common, where we have a peak of future demand. Because I mean, the previous situation is where we've got quite static demand. You might, wholesale distributors, for example, might be able to operate in that way. But if you've got sort of seasonal variations in your products, you're going to have quite a different looking thing. So what you're looking at here is the demand forecast for a single product of mine. It's a beer that I brew, and the left side's the past, the right side's the future. And just like in that little graphic in the slideshow where we can see in future months, demand is curving up here. It's that blue line there, because I'm expecting a big spike in sales. And I can even adjust that forecast. It's very straightforward. And, maybe I signed a deal with some festivals to sell my beer in over those summer and autumn months. So having done that, I know I have to plan both my production and the purchasing of ingredients for production to match this kind of upcoming peak in demand, but also do it without filling up my warehouse space too early, overstocking and being left with a product I can't sell. And so, yeah, this is the tool that does that all for me. Literally, as I adjusted that demand curve, it's factoring supplier lead times for ingredients, the time that the actual production process is going to take, as well as the safety stock buffers I want, and applying it all to that future forecast in real time and making a purchasing and production plan that will get me where I need to be without actually blowing out my cash flow or indeed leaving it all too late. And so when I just flip it over to that supply view of this forecast that we look at, it looks a little bit like those graphics from earlier. The green part is my stock on hand volume, the goods being restocked and then used up at the rate set by my demand forecast. And in fact, there's little lines here, the blue lines, replenishments from production runs, creating that bare product. And you can see the size of them stepping up in time for that forecasted demand peak hitting. And ultimately, the whole purpose of this is simply to create that purchasing and production plan that tailors my buying and stock holding strategy to what I'll need in the future. So I'll stop sharing there and leave it at that. But as you can see, there's some very useful tools for managing cash flow and inventory, although they do get quite technical. Let's just go, where are we? How do I stop sharing? Okay. Apologies. Are we back?
Yeah, we can still see your screen.
Oh, wait a minute.
That's it.
That's it. Back to normal. Yeah, so that was a little longer than I had planned, but I guess that just illustrates the amount of cash flow that is tied up in inventory. It's going to be pretty impactful side of things for a lot of businesses. And I think that's probably quite critical is actually managing that amount of cash flow output as you scale, especially, I think. Perhaps less so in the earlier days when I think you can actually get away with the sort of spreadsheet style approach. Are you, by the way, Keth, are you an AIM user or have you guys used that in Sapling?
I I don't get that close to it because we've got an
Yeah.
ops manager here. So we definitely demand planning is super important, and I spend a lot of time looking at it with our ops head of operations. I think they use a combination. I mean, we use Unleashed all the time, day to day, and I think we use a combination of that and spreadsheets. We've got quite a lot of assembly involved in the stock and also duty as well. So it makes it makes it slightly more complicated, but I mean the imperative still stands that demand planning is absolutely super important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it become more important with your products? Presumably the manufacturing of them takes quite a long time.
It's not actually that long
Right.
but for some alcohol it can be. You know,
Yeah.
if you're talking about a whiskey, you know, it's obviously got to be laid down for a number of years as well, so it takes a long time. But if you're talking about, you know, it really depends. But either way, the demand planning of bringing the goods together to make the finished product and understanding your sales forecasting is key.
Yeah. And I guess lead times from what we're hearing are lengthening at the moment. Sort of shipping times are getting longer. So it's actually rather than being a cash flow opportunity, it's more of a can we get enough stock and let's not stock out seems to be the territory that we're moving back into.
Yeah, yeah.
I think what we've heard from many, I think when we started out with MIMO, there was still, you know, obviously some impact from some COVID and Brexit in particular as well, obviously sort of hurting import sort of timelines into the UK if that's sort of the market you're selling into. And so definitely those complexities have led to some extended, you know, therefore inventory holds or logistic timelines and sort of impacting cash flow. And so that was actually a big of a sort of a big driver of our early sort of go to market and sort of helping businesses manage that sort of complexity.
Yeah. And is that in terms of the financing side of your app where people are actually accessing finance? Is that an app that people are doing that?
Exactly. Yeah. So essentially in this app where we have these three legs, essentially MIMO Pay, helping you automate supplier payments and do that in a quicker way. Get Paid, which is essentially then sort of working on some of those reminders and overviews on who's paying you and not for your credit control work. But then finally, yeah, it's MIMO Flex, essentially helping you defer supplier payments. So when you're making supplier payments, you can choose to pay and fund those payments with MIMO Flex such that you can defer that supplier payment by up to 90 days, which is then exactly for your cash conversion cycle. We essentially pay the supplier upfront. You get the goods, you hold it in inventory, and you sell it on, and then essentially repay MIMO at a later stage when you've hopefully collected funds from your customers to shorten that cash conversion cycle. So that's essentially exactly the use case that brands are using MIMO Flex for. Yeah.
Nice. Is that actually, out of curiosity, is that do you choose when to pay it, or is it sort of baked into the system? Is it systematized so that as soon as the funds land, then it just works for you?
It's totally up to the business. And so we're working on some smart recommendations based on cash flow forecasting, but right now it's totally up to the business. You only pay for it if you use it, and sort of it sits next to you when you're making payments, right? As a payment option method, really. So you can fund supplier payments either from your own house bank or then through MIMO Flex. So it's totally up to you as a business, and obviously to Keth's point, a lot of that then comes down to you being on top of your own cash flow planning and your own cash flow forecasting, and knowing your cash conversion cycle to then define when does it make sense for me to use this, and what sort of, in particular, typically what most companies use it for is in stock and inventory purchasing, but also to some extent marketing investments. Some are using it for if they're investing in particular D2C brands, right, and you're sort of spending on Meta or so on, then it could make sense to defer some of those payments if you have a quick cash conversion cycle to essentially have less cash sitting out while you're collecting from customers. So yeah, those are a few different use cases.
Nice. Is the margin aspect of that built in there? Obviously, you've got money coming in, money going out. Is that built into the app, or is that sort of something outside of it?
That would be outside of it. So we're very focused on the cash flow side. We haven't built a sort of analytics tool for margin planning or margin analysis. Obviously, there's some functionality in Unleashed that I think many of our brands are using when it comes to sort of margin analysis and so on. So that's not something that we built in, but obviously working closely with Unleashed on a few deployments with some of our customers that are using those two tools in combination, if you may.
Nice. Has that become, Keth, when you were looking at sort of the cash cycle, you're paying a lot of attention to the kinds of products that you're selling to when cash flow is particularly critical? Are you making decisions about which products to promote or move?
Not well. I think that's a kind of, I suppose, a longer term strategy thinking. That's not, I think that'd be quite hard to be tactical on, unless it's like a sudden, like one of the things you do need to do as part of inventory management is watching slow moving stock. So that might be an element where you're kind of like, oh gosh, we made a bad call on this thing last Christmas or something and it didn't sell. Let's try and get rid of it somehow, whether that be through sampling or using, there's giveaways to influencers, or I don't know, or some kind of marketing tactic. But in terms of actually using, trying to promote different, I suppose it really depends on if you've got very different profitability SKUs. I'm assuming like the most of the businesses I've worked for, you don't have a huge difference between one SKU and another. There are differences, but not like to that extent.
Yeah.
But it could be a tactic. But you'd obviously have to think about the cost of promoting that sale, if you like, because it's not all for free.
Yeah, cost of acquisition.
Exactly. Yeah, lots of people forget about all those extra bits down the bottom of the P&L.
Yeah, that's right. It's a friend's business had an unpleasant surprise when a promotion landed really, really well in a remote part of the country because
Yeah,
everybody knew
the
that
shipping costs were insane.
yeah, that's right. So yeah, you can. I'm not sure if anyone's actually bankrupted themselves on a successful promotion, but it's sort of it's not impossible.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, is there anything else that we should be covering off? Are there any burning cash flow advice tips that you'd like to offer before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think we've touched on it, but I think having, if we're talking particularly about the cash conversion cycle, something we were talking about before everyone joined was making sure, trying to have a kind of longer term strategy, because I think you can be quite tactical about these things and thinking in short term windows. But really knowing your bill of materials, knowing how much it costs to make your units of stock, how much they sell for, and having a longer term plan to achieve better margins over a period of time, because you should be able to get there with scale and making sure you make the right decisions on what you're buying and how they trade off against each other. Because essentially, the more you spend in your cost of goods, the less money you have to play with elsewhere on your marketing and people.
Mm. Yeah.
But it's obviously got to be carefully
Yeah.
balanced with how much you can charge as well to your consumer. So yeah.
Yeah. Does it go for
Exactly. And
supplier terms as well and that sort of thing? Or should you really be having
Yeah, so in that kind of
big-
strategy, it would be thinking about when you need to optimize, like how you can optimize so like thinking about your overall margin, but also about your cash flow conversion cycle, and really thinking all along the way when we can start negotiating with different suppliers, or well, let's have a think. For example, you might have had a long-term bottling relationship with someone, or a packaging relationship, or someone who's making your finished goods product. Having a plan to every year or two, it's probably a big process, so it really depends on how long it takes, but going out to tender, making sure you're
right,
getting the best deal.
right.
Not just sort of sitting back and saying they're the best, because they might not be when you've scaled up, or even what's good for you when you're selling 10 units is not necessarily good for when you're selling 100, and it's definitely not probably very good when you're selling 2,000. So
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Henrik, have you got any?
indeed, I mean, I would encourage if you sort of take a little bit of step back, I would encourage founders and businesses to sort of, first of all, understand what the cash conversion cycle is, and then second of all, understand what their current sort of setup and performance is across those three components. I think then the only real way to sort of get better at something is to then understand what are the different levers in terms of operating procedures that I can have across each of these three to improve it over time, and then get yourself into a cadence of running those operating procedures and actually monitoring how it's all developing over time. I think that's a combination of those two things, understanding where you currently stand and monitoring that over time, and then setting a plan for how you can actually improve it, and knowing what levers you can pull. That will essentially inform both your margin development over time, but then obviously also your cash flow development over time, and implications on how you can then fund that working capital. So I think starting to measure it, and then sort of making sure that you run processes that essentially both to keep measuring it, but also then to continuously try to improve it over time, are really the two things that I would argue sort of can really help a business start to take control. Because I think usually the biggest challenge is if you don't really know what's happening, or what implications a potential large order or a big swing in your business would have.
Nice, thank you. Well, look, with that, it's almost an hour, so I think, and I checked before we had one question, but I've just typed a quick answer to that. So I'll just say thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and hopefully our audience has too. I'm going to process this recording and email it out to everybody. So if people had to drop off or they couldn't make this call, you'll get an email from me. And if you have burning questions for Henrik or Keth, then just email me back, and I can I'll pass those on if that's okay with you both. Right. Thank you very much.
thank you.
And,
Bye, everybody.
enjoy the
Thank
rest of
you.
your day.
Thanks a lot for having me. Cheers.
Cheers.